How did Chicago become so segregated? The short answer, by inventing modern-day segregation itself. WTTW News reporter Heather Cherone joins us now to explain and help kick off our WTTW News special on segregation. Heather, this is a deeply researched article that you've written for our website here, but in plain terms, how did Chicago invent modern-day segregation?
Well, I think it's really important that we start with what segregation was designed to do. And in the simplest terms, it was designed to create a Chicago in the early 1900s that was a haven for white people at the expense of Black people, that was enforced not only by the weight of law, but the force of violence. And really, the bedrock of modern segregation in Chicago is the use of racially restrictive real estate covenants. That was actually invented by a member of the Chicago Plan Commission that legally prevented Black people from buying property in areas that were deemed off limits to them and reserved for white people. Once that was in place, the rest followed, which included contract buying, which exploited Black people desperate to buy a home and start building wealth. And then it morphed after the Great Depression into the use of federally backed mortgage loans. And that's where you get the term redlining. And that really set the stage for what Chicago looks like now, with pockets of deep disinvestment on the south and the west side that you just don't see on the north and the northwest side.
I was going to say the effects are still seen today, Heather, even though those practices have been outlawed for a while. And WTTW partnered with Southside Weekly to make an interactive map that shows how the city's population morphed between 1930 and 2020. So tell us the takeaway of this map.
Well, I think what's most startling about this map is how much doesn't change between 1930 and 2020. The force of those barriers that I just briefly described were so deeply entrenched in Chicago that even when you get to 2020 today, really that map shows where those lines were drawn at the beginning of the century. And that's what we're all grappling with when we talk about the really pernicious effects of segregation in Chicago.
All right, now we see the green circles pop up after 1970. That's when the Latino population comes in, although Chicago had Latino and Asian American population way before that. So why is it not represented until 1970?
Well, this map was based on census data, and it wasn't until the 1970s that the census started tracking the Asian population in Chicago, and it wasn't until 1990 that the Latino population in Chicago shows up in that census data, which really tells you just how much less attention was on this data than today when we're looking at this information very closely.
And you end your reporting with a look at Chicago's future and the prospects to sort of get rid of this moniker as the most segregated city. So how do the prospects look?
Well, there's no doubt that the scars of segregation are deeply embedded in Chicago's fabric. However, there is, maybe a glimmer of hope on the horizon. In the 2019 mayoral election, Lori Lightfoot explicitly campaigned while calling out segregation and vowing to address the inequities that it has created. So while there's certainly much more to be done, at least we're at a point where a significant majority of Chicagoans elected a mayor who called out the city's official role in creating those barriers and vowed to do something about it. You can't solve what you can't describe, so at least we're starting to do that.
All right, Heather, it's extraordinary reporting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story by visiting WTTW.com/firsthand.